Welcome to this recording of the Sunday morning message from worship at Hudson Wesleyan Church. We trust the time you spend in the Word of God with us today will be transformational to your spirit and enhance your relationship with Jesus Christ. Want to find out more about a relationship with God and the work He is doing at Hudson Wesleyan Church? Visit www.hudsonwesleyan.org. Now, here is Pastor Wes Rowan with today's message.
A weird kind of feeling Sunday here in between, sandwiched between two cultural realities, right? Christmas is over from the cultural side of things. New Year's isn't here yet. We have been with family and food and presents and all those things this week. Which means by this point in the week, some of you are absolutely positively ready to not be around any other people for quite a while. Some of you have just enjoyed it thoroughly. Some of you are thinking about the returns that have to be made. We were traveling and with family over the last couple of days and had reason to be in the largest city near where my in-laws live, which is Canton, Ohio. Some of you know where that is. And the lines and the traffic around the mall, just as bad the couple days after Christmas, I think, as the couple days leading into Christmas. But really, when Christmas ends, at least the holiday, again, we are in the Christmas season of the church calendar. I'll talk more about that in a second. But when the Christmas season ends, it feels to me a little bit like when that week of summer camp would come to an end, you know? For some people, if you're not a camping person and you went to camp, the end of the week could not come fast enough. You wanted to be home, you wanted to sleep in your own bed, you wanted to be in a room by yourself, you wanted to have your own shower and to use it, and the end of a week of camp couldn't come fast enough. But if you had maybe made a friend or you met someone new that was not from your area, and so you had developed a friendship, or if you had had a really great week, you know, that week of camp ending always felt like you were kind of leaving part of you behind. And if you went to church camp growing up as a kid or a teenager, you also know that you come home from church camp pretty sure that you could never have possibly experienced any higher highs of religious euphoria than what you experienced at camp. And then you come back and you realize that you're still in the same church with still the same people, acting still the same way, and it just sort of feels a little bit like you bottom out a little bit. And I think that post-Christmas has a tendency to feel that way just a little bit. We spend so much time with the anticipation and the excitement and then the enjoyment of the Christmas season. And we sing all those songs and we light all those candles and we hear the story accounted again of Jesus coming to earth. And then the secular side of it too. We enjoy the buying gifts and watching people open gifts and getting gifts that we receive. And that is all very enjoyable. I was as we were traveling, we went to a Christmas Eve service in Ann Arbor. We were spending a few days up there with the kids and went to a church just down the road from where we were staying. And it was a Lutheran church in the same denomination as this Lutheran church. It's right down the road from us, and thoroughly enjoyed just sitting there, not having to do anything except just enjoy the service. It was a wonderful way to go. Almost made me quit my job. But it was just listening to other people sing and other people play their instruments and other people read the scriptures and just getting to enjoy it and just be a participant. It was wonderful. The pastor of that church got up to preach and his microphone wasn't working. And I thought, that's fantastic. Because I knew it wasn't working. He had a great projecting voice, and so he was carrying it. And this is a large sanctuary full of a couple hundred people, and he was carrying it without the microphone, but I could tell it wasn't picking him up. And I noticed that he kept putting his hand in his pocket. I knew exactly what that meant. He was flipping the power switch back on and off from his body pack. And He at one point, even in the middle of preaching, as he got partway through his message, I saw him pull the pack out and lay it on the lectern in front of him and then put it back in his pocket. He was double checking, I know he was, whether or not it had power. And I felt so blessed to watch somebody else going through what I believe what Theo calls technical difficulties, right? It was wonderful. And yet, just the beauty of the story, and yet we come here, and Christmas is now 3 days behind us, and it's kind of like, if you're a school age kid or teen or college student, you're really thinking in terms of, wow, now all of that's done, and now we've got this whole next week, or if you're in college, the next couple of weeks, where we don't have to go to school, and wow, we're just going to be able to kick back and relax, and your parents are thinking of all the things they're going to have you do with that free time. Please don't kid yourselves. And so if you've been off work for a few days, you're probably thinking, okay, it's back at it pretty soon here, and there's just a little bit of a lull, isn't there, in our spirit? Like, okay, that was it, right? Has anything changed? Are we just kind of biding our time till the next big thing comes along? Next Christmas, when next Advent comes around, are we going to feel basically the same? I mean, the news hasn't changed, right? Most of our financial situations haven't changed. Most of our relational situations are still the same highs and lows. We've heard a great report this morning of some things moving in a positive direction, but we still have these unknowns, and all this stuff still happens, right? And so it feels a little bit like the honeymoon period of Christmas doesn't last very long. Well, John is writing in his first epistle. He wrote 3 letters to the general church. They're not to particular towns or cities. They're just called general epistles or general letters. And he writes them at a time that's probably, we would guess, somewhere in about a decade, maybe a decade and a half after he wrote his gospel. We don't know that for sure. He could have written all of it in roughly the same period of time. But in his gospel, we read one passage from it last week. John does not tell the story of Jesus being born. Yet John is someone who had firsthand interaction with Mary and with Jesus and those who would have known the story best. But he chooses to write in his gospel account what we heard at the end of last week, that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And then he experienced Jesus' entire life. He's there at the arrest. He is there at the trial. He's there at the crucifixion. Jesus looks down from the cross and says to John, "This is your mother. Take my mother as your own responsibility." John is there at the empty tomb. He sees Jesus in the resurrection, and now he has lived some probably 5 decades after Jesus has gone back to heaven. When the church was taking off, when all of the good news about what Jesus had done was really catching fire and people were being converted and the church is growing, and Paul and Peter have their ministries, and John's a huge part of that. And all of those men, including Paul, have been executed. John's the only one left, and the honeymoon period of the early church is over. The same John who wrote about the beauty of the incarnate Word, the light that is shining in the darkness, and who wrote those beautiful words of John chapter 3, right? For God so loved the world. The same John that leans up against Jesus at the Last Supper. The same John who stood at the foot of the cross and went to the empty tomb on Sunday morning of Easter. He is now watching as false teachings are beginning to creep in to the new church. You see, for a while, and this was still going on, by the way, but for a while, the struggles of the New Testament church that John was watching were dealing with the Jews who didn't believe that Jesus had been the Messiah. They obviously had a big problem with what the New Testament church was preaching. And the Roman Empire is starting to have some problems with the New Testament church because they will not declare any Lord except Christ. So those are kind of the problems that the New Testament church is experiencing, but now a new one is creeping in. In the church itself, there's beginning to be some teachings and some preaching and some second and third generation Christians that are looking at what John and others had written back during the heyday of the New Testament church and going, I don't quite know about that. And it feels an awful lot like coming back from church camp where you've experienced the highs of emotional Christianity and coming back and going, well, is it really what I thought it was? And one of the things that's creeping into the New Testament church is something called Gnosticism. And Gnosticism was the belief that what was human was so corrupt and evil that there could be nothing redemptive about it. So, in order to pursue Christ, Gnosticism taught that you kind of had to do away with all of the connections of your fleshly, earthly body and just realize that this body was never going to be able to really pursue righteousness. The implications of that were, though, that meant theologically that the idea of God coming and putting on a fully human body in the incarnation also could not be true. If everything that was physical was bad, then how could God ever put on a truly physical body? So Gnosticism starts to have some weird teachings that come in, and some of it is teaching that Jesus was never actually a physical body. He just appeared to have a physical body, but that he was actually only a spirit. There was another teacher that lived in the same town, we believe, that John lived in for part of his life, who was teaching that the divinity did not really descend onto Jesus until sometime after his baptism, and that his divinity left him before the crucifixion. So that, in other words, this was kind of another branch of Gnosticism, that the physical was there, but the divine and the physical never completely commingled with each other. And that particular teacher was preaching, contrary to what John was saying, that Jesus could not have been born of a virgin, right? That he was just a human that was born of earthly parents, Mary and Joseph, and then that the Spirit of God descended into him at some point, because you could not possibly have a fully divine and fully human or fleshly God entity. So the honeymoon's over. This is what John is dealing with now as he is watching all the others have been martyred. There are no first generation apostles left. And his responsibility is to try, in these ending years of his life, to pass off to the next generation of the church the absolute truth of who Jesus was. Imagine the same guy who had sat there and talked with Mary and heard her accounting, and who wrote it down in these kinds of words about the Word becoming flesh. The one who had listened to Jesus teach is now worried that within 1 century that the reality of God becoming man will have been lost. And this was a battle throughout the first couple centuries of the New Testament church. In fact, one of the reasons that we have the Nicene Creed that we sometimes say in our services is because they gathered a council at Nicaea together where basically the emperor was like, I don't care what solution you come up with, just come up with something that we can enforce. That sounds like the government, doesn't it? It doesn't really matter what rule you come up with, let's just have something that you can enforce. And so at the Council of Nicaea, they came together and argued and fought and waged theological war over whether or not there was going to be a recognition that Jesus was fully human and fully divine. And so in the Nicene Creed, we hear the words, very God of very God, very man of very man. But in the early church, none of this had been formally decided. From our perspective, it looks like the reality of the theological experience of God becoming man is on a thread. And John is watching all this happen, and so he sits down and pens a letter to the general church, and he starts it out like this. And this is what Elizabeth read. What was from the beginning? What did he say in his gospel? In the beginning was the Word. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, listen, what we have seen, what we have touched. What is John saying? It was a physical experience. See, John would have nothing to do with people telling him that Jesus wasn't really a physical body. John had laid his head against Jesus' shoulder. John had seen the wound in his side post-resurrection. John had watched the blood flow out at the cross. John knew that Jesus was a real physical person. But he also knew from having heard Jesus and watched him that this was no physical person that was just endowed with some fairy dust of sprinkling God's supernatural power into his life. No. He knew that Jesus claimed to be more than that. I and the Father are one, John had heard Jesus say. And so he says that which was from the beginning. He's eternal. He's been around the whole time. He is what we call the word of life. He says all of this right in verse 1. Can you imagine if you get a text message from somebody, right? We don't write text messages the way we used to write letters. We were taught in school to write letters. And what was the first thing that you wrote in a letter? A salutation, a greeting. And if you read most of the letters in the New Testament, that is what we see is a greeting, right? And if you're writing a letter to somebody, or even maybe an email, or maybe your Christmas greetings, you kind of start off with, hope you're all doing well. Hope it's been a great year for you. Let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in my life. This feels much more like a text message from John. He's just getting to the point. It's a wonder he capitalized anything. He just said, listen, what was from the beginning, the word of life, we touched him, we saw him, we heard him. He was there. Let's get that out of the way. Before he says anything else. We haven't even gotten to the end of verse 1, and he's already made that point. And that life was manifested to us. We have seen it, and we testify and proclaim to you that eternal life was made real to us or made manifest to us. John is saying, fairly bluntly, don't tell me what I did and did not see. We have seen him. We have touched him. And now we are proclaiming it to you. So John's saying, let's not get this backwards. You are not going to proclaim to me what Jesus was and was not. I will tell you what Jesus was and was not because I was there. I heard what he said. And by the way, this speaks to the validity of the New Testament accounts. These arguments and discussions are being had with eyewitnesses, with people who are there. And so John is going to people who have heard secondhand, and he is saying, no. This is what happened. This is how it was. And now he says, so why am I telling this to you? Why am I proclaiming this to you? This is part of the Christmas story. Why am I proclaiming this to you? Well, so that you can have fellowship with us. In other words, if we're going to be in church together, we're going to have the same belief about who Jesus is. Okay? That is why, as Orthodox Christians, we have lots in common with other denominations who don't believe everything the same way that we believe it, but we believe the foundational aspects together. I thoroughly enjoyed going and sitting and worshiping with my Lutheran brothers and sisters on Christmas Eve night, knowing that we were talking about the same gospel, the same Jesus, and the same Orthodox Christianity that's represented in the same creeds. It was a beautiful reality. But there are some who would label themselves as Christians who do not have this viewpoint of Jesus. And so we would say we don't have theological fellowship with them. We're really not the same thing. And so John is saying, if we're going to have fellowship one with another, then we have to be on the same page about this. That's why I'm telling you about it. I want to have fellowship with you. But even more, he says, and indeed, this is what's going to lead us to have fellowship with the Father and with the Son, Jesus Christ. So John is saying, not only is this going to affect how we get along theologically and religiously in worship, But he's saying if you want to have an ongoing relationship with the Father through the Son, you are going to have to believe that that Son was fully human and fully divine. And then he says, here's why I'm writing this to you. So that our joy, not just my joy, not just your joy, our joy can be made complete. And so I was thinking about these words this week. We just got done talking about looking for hope and joy and peace in difficult places. And now here we are, very quickly headed off into a new year. The new church year, which started with Advent, is laid out before us. The calendar year is laid out before us. And we're sitting here kind of wondering, okay, I know the difficulties will come and go. I want to draw closer to the Lord. How will my joy be made full? That's another interpretation of the word complete, full. Okay? How will I be full? And I want to tell you something, my friends. I love the church calendar. I love the ebbs and flows of the different seasons of the church, starting with Advent, going into Christmas and Epiphany, then eventually through ordinary time leading into, right, the season of Ash Wednesday and Lent, Good Friday and Easter, heading up to whole season of Easter that leads up to Pentecost, the coming of the Holy Spirit, post-Pentecost, going into the season, again, of ordinary time until we get back to Advent next year. I love it. But if you go through all of the structure of Christianity, the structure of the church year, all of the just ins and outs every day of living your life and coming to church on Sundays, and we will come back to a year from now and we will not be fundamentally different than we are right now. So here's my call for us. John is saying Jesus was not a story. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, we're going to take all these trees and candles and lights and the manger and all of it down, and it's going to be gone. It's going to be put back in storage until next year. And the story we probably won't reread very often over the next 11 months. We won't think too much about angels singing and shepherds bowing and wise men traveling too much over the next 11 months. The stories will kind of be filed away to revisit next year. We won't visit that part of our hymnal much over the next 11 months. But the point that John is making is this is not a story to close the book on and say, that was really nice. That was warming my heart. That made me glad to know that I believe. He is saying our joy can be made complete only in one way, and that is if we have fellowship with the Father through Jesus Christ. So he goes on then to talk about what Elizabeth read for us, that we need to realize two things. One, that we sinners need forgiveness. No one can say they haven't sinned. And that we should love. Those are kind of the two big themes that John gets into. And so what I want to call us to is not to have enjoyed the Christmas season, the Advent season, and to file it away until next year, but to do exactly what John says. My friends, listen to me. The incarnate God is not a story from a manger. It is a reality to be lived. See, what John was frustrated with is that people were kind of adding their own mixture into what Jesus had been and what he had claimed and what he was, and that they were kind of then just they were making up their own religion. They thought that it was genuine, but they had allowed things to get into the account that were not accurate. This is the danger for us, that we will make our Christianity over the next 12 months not about the reality of God incarnate, but more about based off something that feels good, that we enjoyed learning about, and that just kind of allows us to go on living our regular lives with a sprinkling of Jesus over the top of it to make it more palatable. I was having a conversation with my father-in-law yesterday, who pastors the church that I grew up in down in Ohio. And he said, I am so worried that middle-class evangelical Christianity is looking less and less like New Testament Christianity. He said, because it's so easy to be comfortable. He said, we no longer live in this. I'd been thinking along these same lines. It was powerful to hear him say it this way to me. He said, we don't live in a world any longer where we can claim to not be aware of the poor and the needy and the helpless. We cannot claim living in 2026 in the United States that we didn't know that 2/3 of the world doesn't have enough food. We can't claim to know that anymore, or that we're ignorant of that anymore. Technology is too great. It's right in front of us. What would it indeed look like for Christmas not to send us into a new year with a warm feeling in our heart that isn't it great that Jesus came as a baby in a manger? But what would it mean for Christmas to launch us into a new year with a desperate desire to daily experience the God incarnate manifest through our lives? That when we encountered friends and enemies, we treated them the way the God incarnate called us to treat them. When we encounter those who have less than us, whether it's a one-on-one encounter or whether it's being encountered or confronted with it through the knowledge and the news that we get from around the world, that we were to see them the way the God incarnate sees them. What would it mean for us to start to look at our daily experiences, every interaction that we have, as appointments from the divine, not as just random experiences that we go through during the day or the week or the month? This is not a message of condemnation. It is one of hope. What does John say? Your joy can be made full, complete, spilling over. How will it be made full? John says elsewhere in his letter, I have no greater joy than this, to know that my children, in other words, the ones that he had been given responsibility for spiritually, are walking in the truth. My friends, I wish that we didn't have to come crashing down off of the mountaintop experience of all the warmth and beauty of Christmas. But as any parent who's ever bought a new electronic for their kid at Christmas will tell you, it's going to break. The batteries are going to run out. We're going to come around to next year and wonder, what was it that I gave that person last year? I don't quite remember. I don't want to give them the same gift this year. It's going to happen to all of us. So Christmas can't be about the feelings, as warm as they are. I love Christmas, favorite time of the year. It can't be about just, yeah, that was a nice experience. It has to be about what John said. This is real. This is genuine. This is what it was meant to be. So can we be that? Here's the reality, friends. You can't be that on your own. That's good news for us, by the way. So how do we do it? Let's go back as we end. Let's go back to what John said. What gave John such confidence in that ongoing relationship of Christ in him? He said, I've watched, I've handled it, and I've listened to it. So that's what we're called to do. To watch to see things around us the way that Jesus sees them. Every person, every relationship, every reality, the way Jesus sees them. To handle it, to get our hands dirty in the reality of behaving and functioning in ways that Jesus would. That's going to be uncomfortable. And that's not going to be convenient. Right. That's the reality of the God-man who came and gave his very life for us. I've listened to him, John says. So our job is to listen, to hear the word. Kids, teenagers, young adults, middle-aged adults, senior adults, if you are not putting the word of God into your spirit, you will not see things through that lens. Depending on what you're into and what kinds of things you spend your time doing, probably most of us could tell us what our favorite musician or entertainer or actor or politician thinks about X, Y, or Z. How good are we at knowing what Jesus thinks about it? We won't be if we're not watching and listening and handling him. How could John, coming down to the end of his life, have so much confidence to say, no, you've got it wrong. He was fully divine and he was fully human. How could John know when everyone else kind of around him is starting to be like, well, we're not sure. He says, because I listened to him and I watched him and I handled him. I know what it was. What great opportunity for us this year. I'll close with this. We spent a few days away just with our kids this week, and we were up in Ann Arbor, and sometimes you have to go to the mission fields, where there's not much religious going on there, but we couldn't go to Columbus, so we went to Ann Arbor, and just really a few miles down the road from the U of M stadium, and I persevered. I got a text message 2 days, I think it was 2 days before Christmas. I got a text message. Hey, Wesley, are you still pastoring at the Wesleyan Church in Hudson? Yeah. I don't think, especially in today's day of technology, that that's a really big secret. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Well, when you're pastoring in a small town, like you can't just assume that, oh, this is just some random, like anybody, my number's all over Hudson. Anybody can get a hold of me. Yeah? I'm sorry, I don't know who this is. And I don't remember the guy's name. He told me his name. And he had found my profile on LinkedIn. And he had some system that he's trying to get pastors to buy into that helps increase attendance or whatever. Reach out to your community. My first thought was, LinkedIn is still functional. How about that? Okay. Maybe I should look into that. And so he wanted to know if I had time for a 15-minute phone call so he could tell me about this thing, because he works with pastors in this system. And I was like, I really, no thanks. He said, I completely understand. If you don't mind my asking, could you tell me why you said no without even knowing what it was? And to which I came very close to replying, you said you understood, so don't ask me why I did it. You said you understood why I did it. But it was Christmas, and so so instead I went over to ChatGPT and asked it to write a 500-word essay about why I don't like telemarketers. And it did it that fast. I love AI. It's fantastic. And I did not send it to him. I had it in the text box. It was ready to go, but I didn't send it to him. And I just said, really, we've already taken our congregation through some outreach stuff. We've seen a lot of great things happening in our congregation, and it's 2 days before Christmas. He said, no, I understand. How does Friday sound? I thought, so we went from 2 days before Christmas to it. Have you ever met a pastor? Like, the days before and after Christmas are not, I'm not having budget meetings with my board going, hey, do we want to buy a new program? I said, no, thanks. And to his credit, he left me alone then. Or he probably would have gotten the essay. All that to say, I was thinking about this. Because I told him this in the text message. I said, really? I said, if you look at our congregation right now, we have a lot of folks in our congregation. A lot of you did not go to church here 5 years ago. I don't know when you come to a church and you don't know how long everyone else has been there. By my calculations, probably 50 to 60% of our weekly attendance right now didn't come to church here before COVID. Okay? So sometimes I tell you that because as a pastor, sometimes it's easy to get up here and think like, yeah, well, we've said this year after year after year, or we've talked about that, people kind of know what my emphasis or where my... But I just want to make sure for all of us, those who have attended here longer than I have and those who are newer here, I want to make sure that we declare this here as we head into a new year. Our job is really one thing. It is to try to learn what Jesus would have us do and then to go out and do it. Not through our own strength, not through our own power, not through our own intelligence, but by His Spirit working in us. That is what we're here to do. And so in the next year, we will continue to try to do that through the highs and lows of your own experiences, your frustrations, your rejoicing, whatever you go through, your uncertainties, to try to learn together what it is that Jesus would be about, and then to go out and to do those things through the power of His Spirit. What John is teaching is exactly how that happens. And he says, if I can dare to interject some thoughts for him, basically, this is the story of that Christ, the one I wrote the entire book about. The Word, the light. That's the story of Him. So as we go, is it easy sometimes in our own souls to be dismayed? We look at our own failures and we go, oh man, I'm not getting this right. We look at the failures of people around us and we go, we're not getting this right. And then we look at other believers or non-believers or other churches or other countries or other people, and we go, this is a mess. It's easy to think that, isn't it? Yeah. But John says, no, your joy can be complete because of Him. So, as we end today, we are going to sing from our hymnal another Christmas carol that is one of my favorites that we never ever sing except when I request it, and that's okay because I'm the one up here with the microphone. And it is, I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. And every year, when I choose to sing this, which is usually on the Sunday after Christmas, because it doesn't really fit anywhere else during the Christmas season, I tell you this, that this song is written with very real social situations in mind. That the realities of the world that were being faced when the author wrote this, and if you're looking for it, it's on page 195, we'll sing together in just a second. That when the author wrote this, as you hear the words, he's saying exactly what I just said a minute ago. He's looking all around. This is written in the 1860s. What's going on in the 1860s in the United States? Civil War. Two sides claiming divine right to fight for what they were fighting for. And he looks around and says exactly what I said. We're not getting this right. We're failing miserably. And then he hears the bells that ring out for Christmas. And it starts his mind going down a path that says, wait a minute, there is something bigger at play here. When he listened to the bells, he begins to think, those bells might be ringing, but we are in despair. He says, in despair, I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth. And he was right. His own country was at war with itself. But even when he thought that, verse 4 says, the bells kept ringing, the reality of Christmas. And what were the bells saying to him? God is not dead, nor does he sleep. The wrong will fail. Have you ever been tempted to think that the wrong was just going to be successful? The wrong will fail. The right will prevail. And so he goes on his way in the final verse with that truth ringing out of his soul. And that's the message I would like for us to go with this morning. As we go out into, yes, a dark world, a sinful world, but with the hope of the advent of the Christ, fully divine, fully human, in our hearts.
Thank you for joining us for this message from God's Word. If you'd like to find out more about Hudson Wesleyan Church, visit us at www.hudsonwesleyan.org. May God bless your day.